The first-person shooter is one of the most played and famous game genres out there. Now, that's probably only true because first-person shooter is a really broad descriptor, but it could also be influenced by the fact that you're not considered a real gamer until you played one. The modern FPS game has a lot of problems, there's no denying that, but for now I want to focus on what I consider to be its biggest flaw, and in order to understand it, we're going to have to take a look at the FP shooter family tree. One of the oldest, if not the first-person shooter is Maze Wars, but with its vector graphics it makes it kinda hard to tell what's going on here at first glance. Despite the game being original, it was not a banger, and it was only with the release of Duck Hunt that the genre really started to take flight. 3D was later fleshed out in the titles Catacomb 3D, Wolfenstein 3D, and Duke Nukem 3D. Then finally, after Half-Life and Call of Duty, we reached the modern shooter. And here to give us some insight into development of a recent shooter is a developer from Microsoft Studios. Yeah, that's a good question. I do have this one story that I think sums up the experience pretty nicely. When I was working on another game, my boss called me and he told me about this new project he wanted me to see. He told me to come to his office. And it was kind of weird because he wasn't in his office, and so that kind of spooked me out a bit. And we went to the elevator and he took me to the ground floor. And then it got even more confusing when he took me outside, and then he stopped. So at this point I was really confused, a little bit scared. So I said, "I don't get it, boss. This is just a dumpster." And he stares at me with dead eyes and says, "No, my boy, this is Halo 5. I don't know. I was just filled with despair. I didn't know what to feel. I was scared, confused. It's not that we made a bad game that keeps me up at night. It's that we sold it for $60. So with that, we can finally focus on the problem. Most games get the scope wrong. Rather than it providing an external magnification, it reduces the player's FOV, giving an internal zoom effect. To the untrained mind, this might not seem like a problem, or at least not a very big one. And that's how I used to think until I heard this Carl Sagan quote. "The scope is the ear of the weapon. It provides useful information without making a fuss. It's also very powerful. The only reason mankind hasn't destroyed itself with nuclear power is because we haven't figured out how to strap a scope to a missile." So it stands to reason that if the devs got something as vital as the scope wrong, then they were probably tripping so hard that they fell through the floor, and the rest of the game would suffer and probably be broken and unrealistic because of it. Eventually gamers bypassed most of the terrible scope system by using the quick scope / no scope technique. But that didn't fix these games, it just made them bearable. So I know these games are terrible, but I do understand that I'm being rather harsh on newer shooters, so I'd like to end by suggesting some solutions. The first and most obvious solution is fix how the scope works, and have it behave realistically. Although I do understand that this would be hard to do and would most likely require a complete overhaul of the game's engine, but it's worth it in the long run. The second is make the player or character blind. You don't have to fix the problem if they can't see it, but you could also just make the character blind in one eye, and gameplay would mostly be normal except when aiming down sights. But there are some workarounds to the one eye plan, so I personally wouldn't use it. The final solution is remove the scope completely from the game. It might bring up some balancing issues, but the end justifies the means. So that's really the end of this. There is a problem, but I think it can be fixed. But you have to remember that it's only going to be fixed once the developers see enough outcry about it. So anytime you see this horrible practice, you can message the developer and tell them, "The only game that sucks more than this one is a vacuum simulator. # no scopification without proper magnification."